Good riddance to that Duke knockoff, Duncan exclaimed the next morning. I tell you what, he made himself out to be quite a celebrity. He's nothing of the sort. You will never stop complaining, will you? Grumbled Rheneas. Why can't you accept that something nice has happened for once? Nice? Snapped Duncan. You call some engine pretending to be a ghost in our mine nice? Pah! If you'll ask me, the museum's welcome to him. Rheneas scowled. Ever since Bertram had been on the railway, Duncan had complained bitterly. If it wasn't Sir Handel being sent away, it had been about Bertram. Nothing seemed to be right for Duncan these days, and the little engines were getting tired of it. During the summer season, Rusty, the little diesel, would help out with deliveries to a new quarry not far away. He would occasionally meet engines at the Fat Controller's railway, and they exchanged their news of how things were going. When Rusty told Thomas and Percy all about Bertram, they were surprised. I thought he was just a ghost story, spluttered Thomas. I guess I owe Toby an apology. That's as may be, said Rusty, but no harm was done. I just wish Duncan would stop being so bitter. Ever since Bertram left, he's done nothing but complain. Something obviously makes him tick, said Percy, and I like to find out what it is. Don't we all, said Rusty. I just wish Duncan would open up every once in a while, instead of bottling it all in. Little did Rusty realise that the chance of getting Duncan to confess why he always complained was to come sooner than expected. Before long, autumn came to the narrow gauge railway, but during that time, Duncan's attitude still didn't improve. He and Peter Сэм were in charge of the first train of collecting leaves and broken branches. They had to cross an old iron bridge, which had recently reopened for the summer. I tell you what, Duncan scowled as they puffed along. It's always been, oh, look at Bertram, isn't he smart? Or, oh dear, has anyone seen Sir Handel lately? Or, oh no, Duke's done a runner. And then there was trouble. There was a loud bang. The train slowed right in the middle of the old iron bridge. Steam leaked everywhere from Peter Сэm, which made Duncan cross. And to make matters worse, Duncan exclaimed, and the one they call Stuart has suddenly taken a leak. I tell you what, you engines are disgraceful. I do all the hard work around here. That's enough! Who do you think you are, telling us all what to do, thinking you do all the hard work and all the things that have happened here? I'm fed up of it. Why do you always complain, Duncan? I'd like to know right now. You want to know why I complain? Duncan finally muttered. Do you know where I used to work before I came here? Not that I'm interested, no, said Peter Сэm. I worked in a factory on the other railway, puffed Duncan. I hated it there. The workmen were idle and dishonest, tools often went missing, the tracks weren't even repaired, and then there was Kane. He was their favourite engine. And yet, if he made a mistake, I got the blame. And if I tried to do things better, it was always Kane that got the praise. I'm so happy Mr. Percival brought me here, but it won't change what I experienced in that old factory. So there you go. Now you know why I complain. Feel free to have a go at me now. Peter Сэm didn't know what to say. I'm really sorry about what you went through, Peter Сэm whispered quietly. But we still have a dilemma of how we're going to get home. I can't move. You might not, but I still got steam, said Duncan confidently. He gave a sharp blast of his whistle and pushed with all his might. Before long, Duncan, Peter Sam, and all the trucks of leaves and broken branches were off the bridge and away to the top station, without any trouble along the way. A few days later, Duncan was heading home light engine after a long day's work. At Crovan's Gate, he met Rusty and Skarloey. "Good evening, Duncan," said Skarloey. "Busy day?" Yeah, thank you," replied Duncan meekly. "Is there, anything you'd like to tell us?" Rusty asked. "Regarding Peter Sam?" "No, not at all," replied Duncan. "I just helped him across the bridge when he broke down, that's all." "You don't need to hide any secrets from us," said Skarloey with a wink. "Peter Sam told us everything, and we're sorry." "We had no idea you went through all that," said Rusty. "Well, I don't want it repeated. Not ever," said Duncan firmly. "Of course," chuckled Skarloey. "Now that we know what caused you to complain in the first place," said Rusty, "are you going to stop?" "Are you kidding me?" snapped Duncan. "There's loads of things to complain about on this railway. The track constantly curving keeps buckling in the summer heat, and I tell you what, the trucks get heavier and heavier when you take branches and leaves away, and because the handle's gone, we've all had to carry all this work, and I tell you what, especially
As Duncan complained out of the station, Rusty and Skarloey chuckled. "Some things never change," said Skarloey.
James was a mixed red traffic engine. He loves the pulling coaches and freight cars. But sometimes he being swanky. Sometimes he being teasing other engines, especially the small engines. Look at me now. I'm a smart engine and red engine on the line. Lily and Doug were cross. "Silly James, how could be swinging like that?" said Duck. "James must be a bossy boiler," said Lily. "Well, James had been show off like that, but how?" The other engine is trying to think about ideas, but they don't know how. Meanwhile, James, however, he was on time and smoothly. Later that night at the sheds, Duck told Donald all about the plans and playing a trick on James. "Oh hey, he's been cocky sometimes, but we don't know. The engines try hard, but it was no use but until Sir Toby had arrived at the sheds." "Good morning, James. I had an important assignment to do. You had to pull some goods trains and take to the figures town." "Goods trains? But sir, I had to pull coaches, or somehow, instead of pulling trucks." "Well, James, you don't like your pulling cars, I know. But there's a changing plans and any jobs. Edward was taking passengers today, and Henry was taking goods trains to Figurstown to the mainland. So you had to do it in very slightest way." James felt anger. Soon James arrived at Nafford's yards and picked up the freight cars. The troublesome trucks started giggling, but James didn't take no notice. Soon, James went up the hill. The troublesome trucks made their plans. and the chosen trucks push him down the hill. "Stop! Stop!" cried James. Ahead there was a sharp curve and the garden and the greenhouse, but James couldn't stop in time. James went off the rails and smashed into the garden site. So Toby had arrived at the scene. "James, this is really catastrophe. First, you smashed to the greenhouse and the field. Now, I had to pay the gardener for the new greenhouse and fences too. After you mend it, you will stay in your shed." "Yes, sir, I'm sorry, sir." Well, James, swinging about, ended up into the accident by the garden catastrophe. But James didn't say nothing. As he went back to work, he apologized to Lily and Duck. "It's alright, James. Everyone made mistakes." And James could hardly agree. People and enthusiasts came over around the world to celebrate Toby's anniversary. They also documentary about him, but however, enthusiasts will turn him disaster. It was one day at an event. Toby was wrestling at the turntable when three naughty boys saw Toby. They thought it was going to drive a train. They pulled the throttle, but nothing happened. The three boys left with their disappointment. Toby was wrestling happily. He didn't know his full throttle had been closed properly. Then it happened. His wheels started to move from away from the turntable. Toby slowly woke with a start. "Driver, fireman, is it time?" But driver and fireman nowhere to be seen, nor driver and fireman came back. "Wait, Toby, stop!" Before Toby realized it, his wheels left off the rails and he smashed through the wall. He's still moving on the grass. He went up a hill. Toby was so scared. He didn't know what to do. "Oh dear," said Toby. It wasn't good, but his wheels still moving. Toby went up, down the hill so many times. "I hope it's nothing," said Toby. But there was trouble. He heading towards the main line. "Oh, horrors!" cried Toby. "I can't look." Just then, as he rolled over to the ditch, he came to a stop. When he opened his eyes, he could see inches away from the mainline tracks. Toby sighed in relief. "Goodness," said Thomas, "are you alright?" "I don't know, Thomas. I just came off the rails by the turntable, and my wheel's still moving on the grass. I tried to stop, but it couldn't. But the ditch saved me." "Oh. Don't worry, Toby. I'll put you back on the rails soon." So he did. It took some time when Toby put back on the rails. There's no damage had been done with him. So Top Hat spoke kindly to Toby. "Your accident wasn't your fault. Those little boys should have known better had their properties. The police knows that little 3 boys were. They soon won't happen again, Toby. Thank you, sir. But Toby couldn't understand why. How did that happen? But didn't feel right. Don't you?
One morning, Gordon arrived at Edward's station, looking rather annoyed. "Problem, Gordon?" asked Boko. "There is something to be said," Gordon replied, "for quiet engines like you, Boko. I understand we must whistle for the plate layers, but some of it is most excessive. It isn't wrong, of course, but..." Gordon's speech was interrupted by a booming whistle in the distance. It grew longer and louder, and soon Murdoch shrieked through with a heavy goods train. "I rest my case," Gordon harumphed. Later, Boko found Murdoch resting in the sheds. "If you've come to complain about my whistle," snapped Murdoch, "I've heard quite enough from Gordon already." "I'm not complaining, I'm concerned," Boko interjected. "I've never heard you make such a racket." "This blasted new driver seems to think my whistle's a toy. Blows at any chance he gets. Too long and much too loud," Murdoch shuddered. "I tell him to stop, but he only laughs." I quite understand," murmured Boko. "In my experience, new drivers tend to learn their lesson rather quickly." "It can't happen quickly enough," sighed Murdoch. "Going to wear him out at this rate," sighed the fireman. "Nonsense," scoffed the driver. "Engines like him are meant for it. Why give him a big, booming hooter if we're not going to use it?" "I don't think you understand which engine you're driving," chuckled the fireman. "He'll never want to whistle again after you're through with him." The fireman was right. Murdoch grew increasingly irritated at the sound of his own whistle, and barely said a word to anyone as he scowled down the line. Boko tried to comfort him, but the other engines weren't as sympathetic. "When do we get some of that peace and quiet you're always moaning about?" teased Henry and James. One morning, mist shrouded the island, and a light rain made the rails damp. As Murdoch set off with his goods, he was struggling to see the line ahead. All too often, his focus was broken by his own whistle. "Will you stop that?" he barked at the driver. "This journey will be hard enough without you making that racket." "Have to let people know we're coming, especially in this mist, don't we?" the driver replied with a smirk. They soon approached Edward's station. Murdoch knew what came next. Gordon's Hill and a hard climb. Boko was nearby and tried to hoot a friendly "hello." Of course, it was swallowed by the sound of Murdoch's own whistle. He charged at the hill, puffing and snorting. Until he reached the top. Murdoch braced himself for what would come next. But there was no whistle. "I'm glad you're seeing sense," sighed Murdoch. "But this is one time we have to whistle." I can't!" cried the driver. "Something's jammed!" Murdoch went pale. The plate layers were just down the line. The driver pulled the whistle chain with all his might, but still, no sound came. "Look out!" Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Soon, Boko arrived to help. He took Murdoch to the workstation, then carried on with the goods. "I'd say the lesson has been learned," Boko winked, as he saw the fat controller talking severely to the driver. Soon, he came to see Murdoch. "I'm very proud of you, Murdoch. The plate layers tell me you've never been so loud before. Your quick thinking prevented a very nasty accident. We'll soon have you mended. For now, I'm sure you'll enjoy some whistle-free moments of peace." "Thank you, sir," chuckled Murdoch. Sure enough, Murdoch was soon back on the main line. His whistle was working better than ever, and saw far less usage than before. The driver had taken a temporary leave from the footplate. He volunteered to assist the plate layers with repairing the line. Whenever he heard Murdoch's whistle, he smiled, knowing it meant one of two things: a warning to stand clear, or a means of aggravating Gordon.
"And there's another thing," grunted Gordon to Duck one morning. "You don't have to keep puffing into the station and blowing your whistle like it's going to burst. I've told Henry and I'm telling you, whistling isn't wrong, but we just don't do it," Duck muttered under his breath. Duck, the Great Western Engine, had been dealing with the usual complaints of Gordon for the last 3 days. His whistle, which he was very proud of, as well as his Great Western heritage, had been getting on Gordon's nerves, and the Big Blue Engine saw to it that his voice would be heard along with everything else. Duck was starting to get rather fed up. "I say, Gordon, make sure you don't burst your whistle valve again, otherwise you'll scream through the station like a banshee like last time." "You weren't even here," snorted Gordon, "so you can't tell me what to do." And Gordon fussed away to the big station. Once again, Duck grumbled to himself. It was never always a good thing when Gordon complained, as sometimes the engines never heard the end of it. Gordon backed onto his train at the big station. He was still annoyed with his conversation with Duck, but he was hoping that a good long run would make him forget all about it. The guard had just blown his whistle when Gordon gave a sharp blast of his own. Then there was trouble. Gordon blew so hard that his whistle valve came loose. Again. "Oh no!" he groaned. His driver managed to shut off the regulator just in time, but it appeared Gordon had to go to the works for a new whistle. "I can't abandon the express, not now," Gordon wailed. Henry, who was close by, promised to look after the express until Gordon returned. Feeling rather miserable, but thankful for Henry's kind gesture, Gordon limped to the works, wondering if his whistle would be repaired. can't tell me to whistle in stations or not, he muttered. I'll show Gordon the next time I see him. I'll even... Calm down, old boy, said his driver. You're not exactly the express. I wish I was, grumbled Duck. Later that day, Gordon was back on the express. His trip to the works had been uneventful. Hoping that his whistle had been repaired, Gordon was very upset that he had to have a temporary one until his whistle could be fixed properly. As he waited for his connection with Scar Lowy at Croven's Gate, Gordon seethed with rage. I can't believe I'm given a temporary whistle, he grumbled. How long will this last? I mean, it sounds horrible. It's degrading. It's... But then Gordon stopped in his tracks. When he'd left the works, he gave his whistle a test and realised that there was something familiar about it. By the time Scar Lowy arrived, Gordon had a sly smile on his face. He knew exactly what he was going to do. Duck, meanwhile, was shunting trucks at Crosby Yard. The thought of whistles was still playing on his mind. The foreman was annoyed with Duck too, as he just wanted some peace and quiet. As Duck marshalled a long line of trucks for Oliver to take away, he heard the sound of an engine puffing in the distance. Duck didn't need to guess who it was. This is going to be a treat, he huffed. But Duck was then caught by surprise when a loud whistle similar to his own screeched through the station, with Gordon thundering past with it. Good heavens! Cried Duck. Gordon and the express rocketed through Crosby and were out of sight as soon as they arrived. Duck's mouth hung open. He was unsure what to make of the whistle he had just heard, which he claimed was proper and Great Western. That evening, when Duck limped to the sheds, the story of Gordon's new whistle had already arrived before him. What a lark! Chuckled Thomas. Your whistle's become quite popular, Duck. A splendid sound, if I do say so myself, chuckled Henry. I say, Duck, could James and I have a whistle like yours? Duck just groaned. Don't worry, little Duck, said Gordon. The whistle's only temporary. I'll have my old whistle back soon. But for now, the fat controller's just going to have to accept he's got 2 engines with the same whistle. Gordon gave his new whistle 2 sharp blasts, and Thomas and Henry cackled with laughter. Duck moaned and looked at his buffers. He sensed that it was going to be a long time before he brought up the subject of whistles.
Toby had been busy for the last few days. Paleontologists and sightseers had come to Sodor to explore fossils high in the hills. Toby could never understand the work that went into it, but he was amazed with what they found. What's that thing in the corner? He asked his driver. It appeared to be a long, twisted white twig, sitting on a stand. That's a mammoth tusk, Toby, replied his driver. I think these paleontologists are finding mammoths and saber-toothed cats. They used to live on the earth a long time ago, just like dinosaurs. Toby was impressed. He was even more honoured when he got to take the tusk to the Sodor Museum. Before long, even the little engines, who saw the sightseers and the paleontologists on their travels, were very interested to see what would be discovered next. But none were more keen to know than Peter Sam. Rusty, he said one evening, what is a mammoth? Rusty chuckled. Consider it like a hairy elephant, he replied. Driver says they lived around a time called the Ice Age. I don't understand it myself. Okay, said Peter Sam.
Then what's a saber-toothed cat? It's like a giant lion without a mane and fangs, said Rusty, hoping the description would help. But Peter Sam was still confused. Maybe this was something he can see for himself when he took the first train out the next day. The next morning, Peter Sam rushed into Crovansgate station with his train. Thomas had only just pulled up to the platform. "Are you going to Lakeside?" he asked. "I am," replied Peter Sam. "Why?" "I'd be careful if I were you," Thomas warned. "There's something big walking about." Peter Sam chuckled and tried to sound brave. "If it's a mammoth, Thomas, nice try," he said. "Driver says they died out a long time ago." Thomas rolled his eyes and chuckled. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he said, and he left the station with Annie and Clarabelle. Before long, the guard blew his whistle and even Peter Sam was off. But it would have been wise if he had listened to Thomas's warning. When Peter Sam arrived at Lakeside, his driver, fireman and the guard went to the refreshment lady's tea shop for a break. They even joked that this time Peter Sam would wait for them. As Peter Sam simmered happily, everything in Lakeside felt normal. The paddle steamer that took holidaymakers around the lake, some cars, some people bustling about, a gigantic woolly mammoth. Woolly mammoth? Peter Sam stopped and noticed the tall, hairy elephant standing next to him. "Good heavens!" he cried. "Driver! Fireman, we've got to go!" he wailed. Peter Sam's crew did not like being rushed, but before they can scold their engine, Peter Sam had hurried them back into the cab. "We've got to go! Mammoth!" he shouted. The crew noticed the beast, and before they could tell Peter Sam, he had scurried away without even listening. But I'm sorry to say, there was more to come. Peter Sam pulled into the transfer yards. He was feeling very shaken up, but there was worse to come. He looked up at a flatbed, which was meant for James to take away. On it was a large, ferocious, orange-coloured cat with huge fangs. Peter Sam remembered what Rusty had said and was horrified. Even more so, Mr. Percival, the Thing Controller, was examining it. "Sir, get away from the saber-toothed cat!" Peter Sam shouted. Mr. Percival turned round and was very surprised. "Are you all right, Peter Sam?" he asked. "There was a mammoth at Lakeside," Peter Sam whimpered, "and I thought that cat was going to eat you." Mr. Percival almost laughed. "Oh, Peter Sam," he said. "Thomas did say you'd get shaken up. The mammoth and the saber-toothed cat are going to be part of a special display for Ice Age creatures. After Toby and those paleontologists found the mammoth tusk, we had models of these animals brought over." Peter Sam felt very embarrassed. But at least he now knew why there was a mammoth and saber-toothed cat on the little railway. That evening, Sir Handel couldn't resist a tease. "You never learn, do you, Peter Sam?" he chuckled. "What's next, a ghost engine on a bridge?" Pull the other buffer, scared of some silly Ice Age creature models. Pah, you wouldn't see me getting so hot and bothered over that. Scar Lowy, who had also seen the models, gave a sharp shrill of his whistle, almost sounding like a mammoth trumpeting. "Horrors!" wailed Sir Handel, and he hurried out of the yard without a word. "Ho-ho-ho!" chuckled Peter Sam. "Who's afraid of Ice Age creatures now, Sir Handel?" When Sir Handel did manage to stop and realise what the noise had been, he remained respectfully silent.
There are places on the island of Sodor to which the engines cannot go. The region may be too remote, and the rails simply cannot reach. Or the ground might be unsafe for the engines to travel on. Sometimes, railway lines are built, for time are forgotten, falling into disuse. On a railway as old as Sir Topham Hatt's, many such old lines exist. waiting to be rediscovered. One day, Thomas was at the fishing village, where he waited for his vans to be loaded with freshly caught fish. He used to hate pulling fish, but after Henry's accident, it became much more enjoyable, giving him an excuse to tease Henry when he met him at the harbor. But today, Thomas wasn't thinking about Henry or the fish. He was focused on a set of rusty rails that led beyond the sidings. They seemed to wrap around the sea wall and vanish. Thomas had never noticed them before, but a storm had stripped away the brush which had previously hidden the rails from view.
"I wonder where they lead,"
said Thomas to his driver. "Oh, I don't know," he replied. "I was told that the coastal run ended at the fishing village. We'll have to ask Sir Topham Hatt." The next day, Thomas waited with Annie and Clarabelle at the big station. Sir Topham Hatt was making his rounds when he spotted Thomas. "You're early," remarked Sir Topham Hatt. "To what I owe this pleasure?" Thomas gulped. "Well, sir, my driver and I found an old set of tracks at the fishing village. We hoped you might know where they lead." Sir Topham Hatt suddenly became very pensive. That's interesting, Thomas, but I haven't the slightest clue what rails you're talking about. I'm sure it's nothing, a mere oversight." He walked briskly away. Thomas felt deeply that Sir Topham Hatt was not being entirely truthful. Thomas asked the other engines about the old tracks, but he found no answers. Whenever he tried to broach the subject with Sir Topham Hatt, the topic was quickly changed. The situation was very perplexing to Thomas, not because there may be an old forgotten line, but that Sir Topham Hatt seemed so intent on avoiding the topic altogether. Eventually, Thomas lost patience. One day, he decided to take charge of the situation, his obsession with the old tracks overpowering his usual level-headedness. He spoke to the fish vans. "Would you please bump me through the buffers at the end of the siding?" Thomas asked. The vans, who were normally very well behaved, were so tired of hearing Thomas talk about the old tracks that they willingly agreed. Thomas usually ran around the vans to make his return journey to the harbor. As his driver began to move in, Thomas gave a loud, which was the signal for the trucks to surge forward and bump into Thomas, sending him into the siding and through the buffers, the impact throwing Thomas's crew off the footplate. Thomas curved around the sea wall and down an overgrown part of the line, which stretched far back into the low-lying coastal regions. Broad trees stretched over the rails, blocking out the sun. Soon he came into a clearing, but to his shock, all the trees and plants were withering away, black with decay. Ahead, to his horror, Thomas saw that the track ended abruptly in an old shed. He wanted to stop, but he couldn't. His regulator had been left open. He was gaining speed. He surged over an old level crossing and crashed through the back of the shed, coming to a grief in an old marsh. He was stranded. The water from the marsh doused Thomas's fire, and with his last few puffs of steam, he tried to whistle, but they quickly faded out. He looked around. There was no life to speak of. On a hill above, where he lay, he could see a small town, but the buildings looked abandoned and forlorn. He could make out mining and construction equipment through a dense fog over the marsh. But where was everybody? Thomas couldn't make sense of it, and felt that something terrible must have happened here. Soon, Thomas heard the sound of an engine behind him. It was Edward, with the breakdown crane. Sir Topham Hatt was on board. He and the crew all wore masks, and tread carefully on the ground. "I am disappointed in you, Thomas. Your curiosity got the better of you." Yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir. Thomas groaned. But what is this place? A place I hoped never to return to. This was going to be the site of a state-of-the-art coal mine long ago. But the workmen kept finding pockets of noxious gas. Is that what caused everything to decay? Yes, it seeped into the water supply, poisoning this part of the island. Many people became sick. Edward remembers those days. Edward gave a knowing look. In hindsight, we should have torn up the rails altogether, but at the time it was too dangerous. These things happened, I imagine, Thomas said, as he was lifted back onto the rails. Well, why didn't you want to talk about the old mine? It's not as if this was all your fault. Sir Topham Hatt cleared his throat. Thomas, I have been successful as the controller of this railway, but not every decision I have made has been a good one. I expedited the construction of this mine because the railway was in need of revenue. My hasty actions precluded a thorough inspection of the proposed mine shaft for safety, and the results are what you see here. Thomas felt bad for Sir Topham Hatt. You were only looking out for the railway, Thomas said, regardless of the outcome. That's something to be commended. I think it's also commendable that you've owned up to your mistake. I know I've made my fair share of my own. This is the second time I've derailed the mine. Soon, Thomas was dropped off at the works to be mended. Sir Topham Hatt smiled at the blue engine. Thomas, you've shown me that I still have something to learn from my engines, and I thank you. It is important to own up to your mistakes. I will remember that. We'll have to go on another adventure soon, Thomas joked. Sir Topham Hatt laughed. Oh, I think I'm finished with adventures for now, he replied. Between you, Toby, and Oliver, I've had quite enough. However, Gordon is due to take a late goods train tonight. With any luck, he'll stay on the main line.
Donald was finding his work on the Fat Controller's Railway difficult. Douglas had recently gone to the works due to a broken tender coupling. Donald had secretly hoped it would be the last time that happened. Not only that, but Donald hadn't seen his duck Dilly for almost 2 months, due to the hard work he was being put through. He was just wondering if it was okay to see Dilly at her pond near Tidmouth, when a surprising sight came his way. As Donald came to the level crossing, a lorry stood before him. It had broken down, and its back wheel had been removed due to the heavy load of flour it was carrying. This seemed to be the last straw for Donald. "You miserable muckle nuisance," he scolded. "I can't believe the Fat Controller brought 3 good-for-nothing work stealers to terrorise our island and make our lives a living misery." The lorry just whimpered and moaned for Butch the breakdown vehicle to come and tow it away sooner than later, because being yelled at by a very angry Donald had been the last thing on the lorry's mind. A little later, a tired and deflated Donald pulled into the yard, late and miserable. "Are you all right?" asked Duck. "You haven't been yourself for the last few days." "It's this hard work and the absence of Dougie," answered Donald. "I've tried to work as hard as I can, and I'm trying as well to make the Fat Controller proud, but I feel like I need a change of scenery, and I haven't seen Dilly for as long as I can remember." Duck smiled. He completely understood. "I'll tell you what," he said. "I'll speak to the Fat Controller. I'm sure he can ask a few of us to do some of your work. What you need is a holiday." "I can't take work off," he cried. "Engines don't just go gallivanting off on holiday." "They will when the Fat Controller understands their situation," replied Duck. "Let me talk to him, and we'll see what happens." Donald wasn't sure if the Fat Controller would let him have time off, as he took his trucks away to the chute. A few weeks later, the Fat Controller had some good news. Edward, Oliver, Boko and Duck had offered their services to do Donald's work while he was allowed to go to the fishing village of Normanby. To make it even more wonderful, Donald was allowed to take Dilly with him, as she also wanted to see more of the island instead of her pond at Tidmouth. Donald wasted no time in collecting his duck and setting off for Normanby at once. "This is a nice change," Donald smiled as the harbour came into view. "I wish Dougie was here to see this." As Donald puffed along, Dilly was interested by the new sights and surroundings. Before Donald realised what had happened, she had flapped out his cab. "Dilly, come back!" shouted Donald. But the duck had already disappeared. "Ah, buffers," muttered Donald. "Ah, well, at least Dilly can look around as much as I can." And Donald went to check out the harbour, hoping Dilly would be safe. Nearby, Bertie the bus had brought some children on a school trip. They saw Dilly. She was flapping and quacking, even dancing around and moving her webbed feet, as if she was doing some kind of can-can. The children clapped and cheered, and even Bertie was impressed. Dilly then squawked a couple of times and flapped away from the stand. "I never thought I'd live to see the day," chuckled Bertie. Over at the loading dock, Thomas was annoyed. The Fat Controller had asked him to collect some vans and have them loaded with fish for Henry's flying kipper. "I wish someone else was doing this job instead of me," grumbled Thomas. "It's just not fair. The Fat Controller knows I don't like fish." Thomas's thoughts were then interrupted by the sound of fluttering. His driver heard it too, and when he walked round to the front of Thomas, there, quacking with delight, was Dilly. Thomas was surprised. "Hello there," he said. "I thought you would be with Donald today." Dilly squawked a reply. "Well, I hope you find him," said Thomas. "I just saw him pass here a couple of moments ago." Dilly was delighted. She quacked her goodbyes and fluttered off to find Donald. If only she'd looked back when she heard the sound of a crate dropping on Thomas and hear him exclaim, "Phew! What a pong!" Dilly was delighted when she found Donald near the boats at the harbour. "There you are, my little quackaroo," Donald beamed. "I've been looking all over for you." Dilly flapped up to Donald and rested in the coal in his tender. "And great news," Donald beamed. "I just heard that Dougie's almost out of the wax. Shall we go and see him?" Dilly squawked a happy reply. "Come on then," chuckled Donald, and they set off to the workstation. As Donald puffed along with Dilly in his tender, he felt much better. "Young Duck was right," Donald said to himself. "All I needed was a change of scenery." And with that in mind, Donald and his duck headed home.
I found a quacker in my tender. She was very, very tame, but she quacked all night and through the day she was driving me insane. My driver and my fireman tried everything they know to shoo the quacker away from me, but she did not want to go. The quacker clearly loves me, was impossible to know. So now we have befriended her, she rides inside me car. She quacks in stations big and small, she quacks at people too. Now everyone calls her Donald's duck, but I call him a quackaroo. She makes me so happy with her little ways. So happy, it's true. Now everyone calls her Donald's duck, but I call him a quackaroo. Quacking here, quacking there, she is quacking everywhere. Quack, quack, shoot, 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 she's my little quackaroo. She's quacking here and there, she's Sir Donald's duck, but I call him a quackaroo. Quacking here, quacking there, she's quacking everywhere. Quack, quack, choo, 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 she's my little quackaroo. She's quacking here and there, she's quacking everywhere. Quack, quack, choo, 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 she's my quackaroo. She's my quackaroo. She's my quackaroo.